Kevin Zay, I was wondering if you could comment with your thoughts on troubled teen programs such as Teen Challenge. Some of these programs seem to be using methods and techniques that are not science or evidence-based and end up causing more harm than anything to the people who go through them. In fact, I have heard of such horror stories as reenacting the rape or sexual assault that took place as part of the quote-unquote therapy or breakdown/build-up process for survivors of those crimes who were residents or patients or whatever. I also heard from a friend that went to Teen Challenge that none of the people she was there with who had alcohol or drug problems are clean now. As an aside, do you think any of these might possibly check any of the BITE model boxes? Okay, thank you for this question, Kevin. And I'm going to speak specifically about Teen Challenge and then maybe more broadly about religious-based, faith-based recovery or addiction handling programs. Let's see, specifically the Teen Challenge, I looked into this because it's not something I was real super familiar with or had a lot of experience with before you asked me this question. So I am, conditionally answering this on the basis that I've only really skimmed the surface of what this is about. But the surface was pretty interesting, and I kind of got the idea of what's going on. Teen Challenge is something that was started by a pastor back in the 60s, grew into a addiction program or a recovery kind of program. It's a live-in 12-month program, and that's pretty extensive. And there's a lot of a whole lot to the program. There's vocational training. There's a lot of faith-based work, Bible-based work, and then as you have mentioned and as others have written about, if you go looking this up, you will find some pretty horrific stories of abuse and nonsense. This is a program that does, like the Church of Scientology's Narconon program and other religious or faith-based or faith-operated programs, they use graduates as workers in the program. So, and this is international. This Teen Challenge thing has grown to a very large, many hundreds of facilities all over the world that are doing this, and they do gay conversion therapy, and they do addiction counseling, and people who are recovering from immoral lifestyles, as they would put it, like people who are prostitutes or were trafficked, things like that. So, we're talking about a wide population of potential, candidates of people who will go into these programs. And obviously we're talking about teens. And so if you don't believe that the Church of Scientology has people who are qualified to do drug addiction counseling and recovery work like they do with Narconon, and none of the people who work at Narconon are qualified in any way, shape, or form to do any of the work they're doing. None of them. Not one. I believe the same is true for those who are running this Teen Challenge thing, right? Because this is a faith-based program. This is all about, recovery through giving over to the Lord. And there is very little evidence-based, as you mentioned in your question. There's very little to no real evidence-based methodology or work being done, from a psychosociological perspective. And this is now going more broadly to my opinion or attitude about these faith-based, church-based programs, where just because somebody has a minister's garb or has degrees in divinity, they feel qualified to deal with very serious and very real problems that people have that are not just based in their personal shortcomings. Drug addiction, criminality, alcohol addiction, these are not things that just exist because we lack willpower or we are basically immoral, flawed beings, and we are somehow evading the grace of God, and that's what's preventing us from living, moral, ethical, wonderful, productive lives. Yet what I just said is basically the attitude and fundamental belief that these faith-based programs operate on. It's all about blaming the victim, and it's all about how it's on you that these horrible things have happened to you. Well, sure enough, we all have personal responsibility for our lives, no question about that. But to pretend that we all live in a vacuum and that anything that's wrong with this is only due to our shortcomings, our personal failings, our failure to be responsible, is complete nonsense. It's destructive nonsense to actually think that way. And this is classically how psychologists and religious, these kind of things have moved forward until fairly recently, when we've been learning that the problems are broader. They're bigger than just us. In other words, there are societal factors, and it's not about blaming society. That's not my point. The point is that if you're going to deal effectively with somebody who is suffering from addiction, who has been trafficked or coercively controlled, who has had, major life issues and trauma and abuse in their lives, and without question, anybody who's involved in prostitution, especially teens, are going to have backgrounds of abuse and trauma. I mean, uniformly, you're going to find that to be the case. The exceptions will be few and far between. And because we're talking about human and sex trafficking here, and we're talking about, that this is not good stuff. And this has been, of course, what I've been studying for months. So my head's like all in this little world right now. And so I guess I'm talking about this way because I'm trying to get across that I believe, with the amount of knowledge I now have about this, and having looked at it so intensively as we have been for months now, that I'm seeing these kind of programs in a whole different light, because I'm now much more aware of the psychological principles involved. I mean, we have identity issues, disassociation issues connected with the identity problems, right? We have coercive control and all of the things that coercive control does to people. When you're dealing with addiction, you're not just dealing with the individual, you're dealing with all the social factors, right? People, peer pressure, and even coercive control that can be exerted on teens in peer group situations where you get the in-group, out-group othering. I mean, you get a lot of stuff going on here, right? There's a lot of layers to this you could look at when you start diving into the psychology of how you're going to help this person. And I, rather than try to give you guys all this stuff on recovery, all I want to tell you is that it's really complicated. And there's a lot of layers to it. And when you're going to deal with an individual, you're going to deal with them. You're not going to factory production line people through mental health or addiction counseling and help. It doesn't work that way. Everybody's got their own things, and you're going to have to deal with them as an individual. And so, these kind of live-in programs where we're going to pray every day, and that's going to solve all the problems, to me, is just adding another layer. If you're detecting any upset from me right now, or any sort of about this, it is because I see so clearly that what's going on in these groups, and this is Narconon with Scientology, this is Teen Challenge with their gay conversion therapy and abusive nonsense and recreations and all this other crap. You're not going to pray the addiction away. You're not going to pray the gay away, and you're not going to pray people's actual mental health problems away. It doesn't work like that at all. At best, you are just engaging in further disassociation, further identity confusion, and further guilt and shaming, and you're just further traumatizing the person. And when you do it from a really weird and sick place of love, where you're just showing them love by abusing them and traumatizing them, it makes it even worse because that confuses the person 10 times worse than when they were being traumatized and abused by somebody who didn't have any pretense about helping the person. You know, a pimp isn't about helping somebody, right? He's about getting his money, getting paid. And yeah, they will use all the control mechanisms of pretending to help and all that. But you know what I mean? It's a little bit more of a business transactional kind of relationship. When you have a minister or a priest or a religious figure or an authority figure in Narconon, let's say, and I'm going to keep making this comparison because I see these things as very, very very similar. When you have this kind of figure, they're doing it from a position of help and love and support. And when you're getting abused by somebody who loves you, it is worse than if you're being abused by somebody who you know doesn't have your best interests at heart. It's less confusing. It has less long-term psychological effects, even if the physical damage is rough. And I'm just comparing, kind of apples to worse apples. I'm not trying to say that getting abused by somebody who doesn't like you is fun, obviously, but there's levels to this, right? And it's much more difficult to help somebody who has been deeply abused and traumatized by somebody who they think loves them. It just is. So there's levels to this, right? Is what I'm trying to get across. And these faith-based programs don't really give a whole lot of credence or attention to the nuances and literature, the psychological literature of how and what is going on with these people. They are sure they have their own faith-based solutions, and the Bible is all they need, or L. Ron Hubbard is all they need. Again, same. Right, which is why I'm making the connection. So that's kind of so you ask, do these check any of the bite model boxes? Yeah, they check almost all of them, and that's my problem with them is when you're exerting coercive control over somebody in an effort to release them or free them or de-traumatize them from coercive control, it's not going to work. This just doesn't. That's not how you do this work. And I just wish I could get that across to all of these people in this, in this industry of nonsense that goes on, because I really do have. I don't have. Let me be clear that I do not have contempt for the people who are honestly trying to help others. It's a fantastic thing to step up and try to help other people. And the work that is done in a lot of these groups is done from a place of honest intent to help people. That doesn't change the fact that the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And it's not the intentions of the people who are doing this work that I question. It's not their morality that I question. It is their wisdom and their lack of informed, knowledge about the subject on which they are dealing with. And religion is not adequate to the task of dealing with deep addiction and trauma and abuse. It's just not. And that's my view on it. And that's not to say, of course, as I sit here and people are going to respond to this and they're going to think, well, I was helped. Well, I talked to my pastor. Well, I did this program. Well, I was helped. Well, good for you. Good. I'm happy that you were helped. But I'm talking in broad statistical terms here. I'm saying that it's going to hurt more than it's going to help. In a broad look over a population of people, this is not a good thing to be doing. It's a bad thing to be doing. There are much better things that we could do to deal with addiction and helping people get over coercive control and their past stress and trauma. And that's my take on that. So I don't know. I hope that's somewhat informative and not just a rant. But that's what I have to say about that.